Hi guys, hold on for a second. Before we proceed to the video, I have something very important to tell you. Professor John Bikofas has published his new book in collaboration with Little French Media, and the title of the book is Neoliberalism, Inequality, and Authoritarianism. This book details how neoliberalism impacts the geopolitical economy in the 21st century. You can buy it from Amazon and the link is in the description. Thank you. Now let's proceed to the video.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this analytical session regarding the fall of the Assad dynasty, which lasted approximately 54 years from the father who took over in 1970-71 until the son fell on December 8, 2024, and replaced by Ahmed Hussein al-Shara, the new leader, also known as Jolani, and I could refer to him as Jolani, and the previously Al-Qaeda linked organization known as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which of course is now the new government after incorporating disparate rebel groups into the new regime and into the defense network, as Jolani has announced. The issue of the how this government fell, how the media, the Western media especially, and politicians, Western politicians present this, how Arab governments present this, how Russia, Iran present this, is of interest in itself. Let me start with some basics that there is no doubt whatsoever that the Assad regime was repressive and authoritarian. There is no doubt that, especially since the outbreak of the Arab Spring uprisings, which eventually reached Syria by 2011, 2012, and there was a civil war there, the Assad regime was especially repressive, um, and that the government's power base rested primarily on a handful of very wealthy people linked to the minority Alawite group, which is roughly 12-13% of the population, to which the Assad family belongs. And also, by the way, a group to which around which a patronage network was built, and some of the relatives of uh, the Assad family, especially the richest man in Syria, a billionaire by the name of Rami Makhlouf, a first cousin from his mother's side to the deposed dictator in Syria, were essentially the power base. Along with that power base, the mainly of the Alawite um, socioeconomic elites, there was also the military, the intelligence group, which, by the way, Rami Makhlouf's first brother, rather, also first cousin, obviously, of the Assad dictator, was the head of the civil intelligence in Syria until 2016, after which time he left and went to live in Russia. The Syrian situation is far more complex than the sound bites and the hyperbolic rhetoric intended to leave an impression. One has to really um, dig into various aspects of this. And I, as a historian who, by the way, taught history of the Middle East in higher education, I should tell you that an entire book is required, a lengthy book is required to explain what happened during the Assad dynasty of 54 years, father and son, and to explain even what happened here in the what appears to be an uprising when in fact it was a coup d'état. There are both domestic factors for the downfall of this individual who was obviously unpopular despite having a power base. A power base is usually the military, the police, an elite socioeconomic group, as well as foreign governments. In the case of Syria, the foreign governments, of course, everyone know, at least people who follow Syria know, it was indubitably, it was Iran, which has ambitions of determining, having a role, I should say, in determining the regional balance of power in the Middle East, and the other player was Russia. And those are the two that kept Assad in power during the so-called civil war on the one side, and on the other side, again during the so-called civil war, was the United States indirectly behind Turkey until a point where Turkey sided with Russia and Iran. Turkey, behind Turkey, which was Qatar and Saudi Arabia, okay, as well as Israel and Turkey, I'm sorry, and Turkey and Israel and the United States all had converging interests, not necessarily the same as we will see, but converging interest in all interested in regime change, which finally came became a reality December 8th of this year, 2024. Let me point out that it is a complete myth and, in fact, an insult to anyone's intelligence to argue that the end of the Assad regime represents the dawn of democracy and that Syria somehow will become a Norwegian democracy, social democracy. Far from it. It stretches credulity, it stretches the imagination, the human imagination, to think how a country like Israel, which has been accused by the ICC, the International Criminal Court, for genocide in Gaza, and the United States, which supports Israel and is right there behind Israel in that endeavor against the international court, against international law, and which, by the way, United States has an incoming president, which just in the last few days, Donald Trump, expected to take office obviously January 20th in the United States, announced that he has no qualms about annexing Greenland, Panama Canal, and neighboring Canada. Now, it may sound absurd, and obviously, one hopes none of it takes place, but you never know. But here is the incoming president that, even as a joke, which some of the media have tried to say, well, he's not serious. Well, okay, let's see. This is not the first time he's mentioned these things, but no leader in the world, no responsible leader in the world, um, argues that they have ambition of taking over sovereign territories of other nations, and at the same time points out that the United States is the greatest country in the world and a model democracy for the world. No one does that. No one. And no one, especially having a record of supporting um, Israel against the international court and international law and the United Nations in its so called genocide war in Gaza. So, how can a country like that, leading NATO, argue that it's in favor of this regime, the HTH regime, and that the goal is to end terrorism and bring about democracy, when in fact it is not democratic within its own boundaries? Let us also remember that HTS was, although not now, but it was on the US list as a terrorist organization. Again, I remind people it was linked to Al Qaeda, but because it has agreed to geopolitical and geoeconomic goals of the United States, Europe, the Gulf states, especially Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Okay. It has agreed to alienate Iran, to sideline Russia. Because of all of that, then this regime is acceptable. And that is the essence of it. Not democracy, not freedom, not national sovereignty of Syria, which, by the way, as I'll start now to explain, Syria has not enjoyed national sovereignty. Let me just start there. In 1916, France and England drew up the so called Sykes-Picot Agreement and divided the map of the Middle East. They decided how the Middle East map would be drawn up. This is how the mandate of Syria was born, namely a colony, which became formalized in 1920 of France. So from 1920 to 1945, Syria was a colony of France. The legacy of colonialism and its all of the baggage that goes with it as a former colony is what Syria experienced in the post World War II period era, amid the Cold War. From 1945 until 1970, there was military intervention in the political arena, and it was amid during this military intervention, by the way, that the Ba'athist Party, to which the Assad family belongs, at least paid lip service, which was really a party combining with influence, by the way, in Iraq and Egypt as well at some point back in the 60s. The Ba'athist Party combines socialism, nationalism, pan-Arabism, and it was really a mechanism, a political mechanism to unify the Syrian people behind the armed forces. And from this political entity emerged the Assad family. And Hafez al-Assad was the first, and Bashar al-Assad was the second, of course, the father and son. This is the background of this group. Now, Syria experienced, yes, repression and authoritarianism. However, we have to put things into perspective. What is it that we are comparing Syria with during the Assad era at the regional level? In other words, where was there a country that was not that different from Syria? Okay. And this is an important issue to consider. This is not to excuse, by the way, authoritarianism, repression, corruption, and all of the awful things that happened to the people of Syria, who, by the way, today number roughly 24 million, and according to the United Nations, between 70 and 80% are below the poverty line. And this is largely because of this authoritarian regime, corrupt, and obviously engaged in using the state structure as a means of enriching itself, the Assad family, and the socioeconomic group linked to it, especially from the Alawite sect uh, of Sunni Muslims. So now Syria is, by the way, a country with Shiites, Druze, Kurds, um, um, Sunnis, Christians. Um, it is a country that is um, multidimensional in that respect. And it is true that the Assad regime, especially in the last 15 years or so, was more repressive um, toward anyone opposed to his regime and less tolerant of the disparate groups within the country. However, the geopolitics at a regional and a global level and the geoeconomic goals played a role. Let me begin with Turkey. Turkey is a neighbor, historically had cordial relations with Syria, and Turkey had, especially under Erdogan, the current president, who was behind the HTS rebel group and Jolani in overthrowing Assad, took the lead. However, Israel was also supportive, so was the United States, who wants to take credit for all this, by the way, according to various reports. Um, so the fact is that Turkey played a leading role. The question is why. Turkey did have was a major trading partner. It's one of the major trading partners of Syria's historically, and it did play a role. Turkey, especially under Erdogan, operates, by the way, whose sort of nickname in the Eastern Mediterranean is the Sultan, um, operates under what Erdogan wants to call um, the Neo Ottoman era. He wants to revive the old Ottoman Empire, which was obviously over by World War One. Um, and when Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, the father of modern Turkey, created the republic, the new Turkey as it exists today. Erdogan wants to go before the Ataturk era of World War One and bring back the glory of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire starts, of course, with the fall of the Byzantine Empire in 1453 and takes over the Middle East, much of the Middle East, takes over the Balkans, becomes the dominant power until the 19th century when it history passes it by because Western Europe industrializes, has superior technology, applies it to defense, and begins to um, make inroads in the Ottoman Empire. We wants trade routes. It wants to have more and more influence, military influence, geopolitical influence, as well as take advantage economically of the entire Middle East. So Turkey's decline is directly related to the economic ascendancy of Western Europe, especially France and England, the two countries that drew up the map of the Middle East and are responsible for the plight of much of the Middle East, after which, of course, the US inherits all of this after 1945 and continues the legacy of European colonialism. Turkey, under Erdogan, let me continue, having given you a little bit of history, wants to revive the Ottoman era, the glory of the Ottoman era. And Turkey, it is true that Turkey has managed to build a very strong political economy, not a social develop. There's no social development to speak of in Turkey. Not much social development at all. Hasn't done much for to reduce poverty or social inequality, but it has set up itself as, let me put it to you this way, as sort of the mini China of the Eastern Mediterranean. It wants to play that kind of role. Foreign factories from Western Europe, from the United States, um, from the Arab countries are operating in Turkey. Turkey is, in fact, a country that plays what in modern world systems theory we call the semi-periphery role. It's an intermediary, in other words. And one of the areas where it has had an enormous ambition is energy. And here is where Syria plays a role. Turkey wants to be the energy hub at the regional level for the Transcaucasus region, between the Transcaucasus region, the Gulf states, and then it wants to be a supplier of natural gas and oil distributor for the Balkans and Europe. So, very ambitious energy plan, very ambitious. This ran counter to the Assad regime's plans to have Iran, okay, and its schemes for a pipeline from Iran coming into Syria. Turkey was cooperating with Qatar in 2011, just about the time the so-called civil war started um, in Syria. And just about the time the Saudis and the Qataris got behind Turkey to try to topple the government working of Syria, of Assad, working through rebel groups, although in the name of fighting terrorism. Okay. And the United States behind the Gulf countries and Turkey. So the ultimate geoeconomic goal here was for Turkey to become, to play that kind of role, that kind of a regional. Now, there's some scholars, by the way, especially some Turkish scholars, maintain that the goal of Turkey was not and is not, under President Erdogan, to be just a regional player as an energy intermediary, but rather an international one to reach out to three continents, right? You see, have a connection to Libya, Qatar, Azerbaijan, a major supplier of gas, by the way, for Turkey. And we'll talk more about that. So we have this situation of Turkey playing this role between three continents as a supplier. Syria stands in the way. Assad stands in the way. Assad also stands in the way because Assad was close to Iran, had developed cordial relations with Iran, supported Hezbollah in Lebanon, which of course we know is against the state of Israel. So the situation with Assad is that he found himself against these interests. that are clashing. Now, this gets even more complicated. I'm sorry to throw this uh, other aspect into this. Israel is also interested, by the way, in more or less playing a similar role as a semi-periphery country in the Middle East as Turkey, as is Iran. So what we have is three Middle Eastern countries: Israel, Iran, and Turkey, with conflicting interests, geoeconomic and geopolitical. Actually, the geopolitical interests between Israel and Turkey converge. The geoeconomic do not, because Israel has ambitions similar to those of Turkey as an energy distributor in the Eastern Mediterranean. Part of that Gaza war was, in fact, about energy. Those who follow all of this, know that this is the case, especially after the recent lawsuit that has been filed against the Shell Oil Corporation by Palestinians, by the way. Anyway, so we have converging geopolitical goals and some converging geoeconomic, although Israel, with closer ties to Cyprus, Greece, and Egypt, has and still does have its own goals about using the Eastern Mediterranean as this hub for international energy distribution. Okay. Now, Turkey's goal was to get rid of Assad because Assad was not serving the geoeconomic interests of Turkey when he blocked that pipeline. That's very important, by the way. Now, I want to broaden this out and bring in Russia and the United States so that we can see how really this is much more about broader issues than just Assad. The United States, ever since the disintegration of the Soviet Union in 1990-91, has made no secret that it wanted to penetrate the markets of the Transcaucasus region, Georgia, and to have geopolitical influence there as well, namely Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. Okay? And to have a place in the Black Sea, and from there move on towards Central Asia. Part of the Ukraine war is because of this, by the way. Scholars have already written on this who are interested in geopolitics and geoeconomics. Here's where it gets complicated. Iran has had and still does, and it's getting even closer, as Vladimir Putin announced, I believe either yesterday or the day before that, he's moving, the Kremlin announced an even closer strategic relationship. I don't know how much closer it can get with Iran. And Iran, people probably know, that has a very close economic relationship with China. So we have the United States interested in the geopolitical penetration of the Transcaucasus, the Black Sea Transcaucasus region, and then onward to Central Asia to counterbalance Russia, Iran, and China in the distance. The three axis of evil countries that some people in the West view, by the way. And by the way, let's not leave out North Korea, also allied with Russia, okay, and close to China, obviously. So that's the scheme there. Now, Russia and China, to counterbalance Azerbaijan, which was close to Turkey and supplier of gas, the main energy supplier to Turkey, okay, interested in the pipeline project. but also Azerbaijan close ties with Israel. Okay, um, a thorn in both Iran and Russia, although both have tried to ameliorate relations with Azerbaijan, realizing how important Azerbaijan is. Now, however, in the last 15 years or so, they became closer to Armenia. Historically, Armenia, a classic enemy of Turkey, because in 1915 there was the so called Armenian genocide, Turks eliminating Armenians. So Armenia was used by Russia, Iran to counterbalance Azerbaijan against regional players as well as the United States. Okay. Now, Turkey realized that, and Turkey, by the way, you have to give, especially to Erdogan, credit that he manages to reach out even to classic enemies. Turkey realized that to make headways, especially one country at a time, to realize the neo Ottoman imperial dream that this so called Sultan of Turkey, modern day Turkey, has harbored, he needed to ameliorate relations because one country at a time meant let's see what happens in Syria, and Turkey is indeed set up now as the preeminent regional player in Syria because Jolani and HTS, the new head of state, and the this former pro Al Qaeda group. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is announced that it wants to have keep Iran at arm's length and have basically closer ties with Turkey. They already announced much more closer ties, and along with Turkey, with the Gulf states, Syria, the new Syria announced cordial relations with the Gulf states, no hostilities toward Israel. Syria will not be used, Jolani announced, by the way, will not be used as a country where there will be operations directly or indirectly against Israel. Now, how so far so good. The question is, how did Turkey respond? Turkey is using in the northeast of Syria the Kurdish minority issue to secure a zone of influence up there, while in the south, in the Golan Heights, by the way, which was annexed by Israel in 67, I believe, the Golan Heights, Israel is entrenched, and in fact, Israel is not backing down of having a role in determining the balance of power within Syria. It's not going to allow Turkey to have all the glory. Okay. Israel and Turkey are now the only two countries, along with the United States, which, by the way, announced all of a sudden, oh, by the way, we have 2,000 troops in Syria. Oops, we made a mistake. It wasn't 1,000, it was 2,000. Anyway, that's a side issue. It doesn't matter. The U.S. is not retreating from Syria, especially not now. It will probably increase that number of troops. But the Israel, under the Lebensraum uh, uh, Greater Israel doctrine that it operates, it's going to be firmly entrenched in Golan Heights and may even take more territory at the expense of Syria, although the new government in Syria has announced it has no hostile intentions toward Israel. It wants to be a mainstream conservative Gulf state type, like the Gulf, like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, those countries in the Gulf. It wants to be that kind of state where it ameliorates relations with Israel. Yet Israel maintains a militarist approach to Syria, as does Turkey, by the way. Although Turkey has guarantees that it will be restored as a major trading partner, and more than likely contracts that include energy to realize Erdogan's dream of the Turkey as the energy hub in the Eastern Mediterranean. Um, Yet it's using Kurdish terrorism, Kurdish terror. It's asking the Kurds to lay down their weapons, and it's using that as a pretext. Just like the U.S., by the way, is using the U.S. has been using the pretext of ISIS and rebel groups, although indirectly the U.S. during the Assad period, the last 15 years, was behind these groups, including this one, HTS, in one form or another. With some of these groups, the US, again, indirectly was behind it through Saudi Arabia and Turkey, by the way, and Qatar. Okay. So you see, the situation becomes more cloudy when you begin to unravel, to deconstruct what has been going on here. Now, let me come to some of domestic politics. I want to talk about the president's first cousin and the richest man in Syria, namely Rami Makhlouf. Rami Makhlouf is the first cousin of the president. His brother was, up until 2016, the head of the civil intelligence division in Syria. Now I think he's in Moscow. And Makhlouf, it seems, who's again the richest man, was financing. He was financing the Assad regime's campaign against the disparate groups, foreign armed and foreign financed themselves, many of them, um, to keep the Assad dynasty in power. However, Makhlouf himself fell out of favor with the Assad family. Just a word or two about Makhlouf's business. The Makhlouf family, has been in everything from telecom to shipping to money laundering to narcotics. Those of you who follow events in Syria are probably aware that the new regime, as a display of publicity, I suppose, to show that the former regime was running a drug economy, burned quite a bit of hashish as well as some other drugs in public to show that this was a corrupt regime, which it was, by the way. All of that is true. All of that is true. And it had links to other regional governments and organizations. All of that is true, as well as Western Europe, by the way, buying a lot of that, a lot of those narcotics. Okay. Now, uh, Makhlouf, about 2020, I believe, began to lose favor of the regime, was accused of all sorts of corruption, money laundering, drug running, as though this was unusual. In any case, and the Assad regime confiscated much of his business. However, most of the money of the Makhlouf family is not in Syria. It's actually, much of it is in Russia, in Belarus, and Europe. It's not in Syria. Makhlouf himself had set up shell companies to protect the Assad regime, to shield it from sanctions. By the way, note, just recently, the Erdogan regime in Turkey asked the international community to lift sanctions on the new HTS regime, on the Giuliani regime, and to allow Syria to be economically integrated into the world community. Okay, um, Makhlouf, the billionaire, well-connected billionaire with international ties, including in England, by the way, where the Assad family obviously it has a link through the wife of the president. The Makhlouf was a key player. However, a few months ago, he showed that he was willing to see Assad go. Assad had confiscated his property, a lot of his property, and he turned on Assad, just as Assad had turned on him. So that is another piece of the puzzle of Assad losing domestic support. Makhlouf also had, because his brother was in the intelligence network, in the intelligence services, he also had ties to government bureaucracies from intelligence to defense. There have been reports, and we obviously need, I'm a historian. Historians wait 10, 15 years before they analyze so they some events so they can have some hard evidence. But there is some soft evidence that this individual had contacts within the bureaucracy, within defense, within intelligence. And there is evidence that the power structure of the Assad regime was influenced by Makhlouf, as well as a few others who felt, yeah, it's time to get rid of Assad. And Jolani, it seems, came to power just by magic. Um, so this is the domestic situation. This is not to say that Syria, with 24 million people, according to the United Nations, 70 to 80% below poverty, by the way. We're talking about a country which has roughly 7 million people, 7 million of its population out, either displaced within the country, about half displaced of the 7 million, 3.5 million displaced within the country, and the other half refugees. Close to 1 million in Germany, the rest, most of them, by the way, in Turkey, the rest spread throughout the Middle East. So this is a country that obviously um, has is one of the poorest in the world, a war-torn country. So it's not that there is no love lost for Assad. No, he had very little popular support. This is not a Jeffersonian Democrat. This is a typical authoritarian, corrupt individual running a government through a power structure that included some of the Alawite um, socioeconomic elite, including the relatives of his, and corruption right and left, and repression, as some of the reports have indicated with regard to political prisoners. All of that is true. However, there's a however. What awaits Syria, a country living the legacy of colonialism and exploitation and dependency um, outside of its borders? What awaits this country is exactly what the new regime has pronounced: ameliorating relations with the Gulf states. We know what they are. Qatar, by the way, financed HTS, these rebels who took over, and was behind Turkey, taking the lead in supporting these rebels, getting rid of Assad. Qatar is not exactly Denmark. It's not Estella. It's not New Zealand. It's not a stellar democracy. Um, Neither is Saudi Arabia. Okay, neither is Kuwait. In any event, not that Iran is, not that Russia is. Right? Let's Be very clear here what we're talking about. Be very clear-eyed about what we're talking here. This is not angels and devils, and this is not Satan and God. You know, this is not about moral superiority on anyone's part. This is a struggle of imperialism using Syria as a satellite. That's all it's about. Geopolitical and economic goals to be realized. Syria is very important because of its location, both geopolitically and economically. And it has value regionally as much to Iran and Russia, which, by the way, Russia has historically a good relationship with Syria, going with back to the Ba'athist movement, of the 1960s and 70s. Um, as it does to Israel and the United States and Saudi Arabia and Turkey, especially. This is also a power struggle regionally between Turkey, Iran, Israel about hegemony at the regional level, who will determine the local balance of power, the regional balance of power, and who will become the energy master of that region in energy distribution. That's what this is. This is not about democracy. This is not about freedom. Yes, it's true that the new regime has had publicity photographs and video with some minority elements showing handshakes of Jelani with some of these leaders, local leaders, minority leaders. Yes, that's all true. It's also true that the Christians celebrated Christmas openly without any fear and all that. It's also true that the new government, has promised an open society. I have to look at the history of Syria, and I have to look at exactly what this group is and what its declarations have been with regard to where it's headed, and be very skeptical that it's going to be that much different than the regime it replaced. In my view, the new regime will follow along the lines of the conservative Gulf states. It will not be nearly as secular as the Ba'athist Assad regime. Nowhere near. It will be much more Sunni oriented, religiously observed oriented regime. It will be more in line with the Gulf states and with Turkey, more in line with Israel and the United States, although the Syrian people, the people of Syria, regardless of which tribe they belong to, by the way, and which religious sect they belong to, have no love for Zionism or the United States. The United States and Israel are not heroes in the eyes of the majority of the Syrian people, by the way, any more than they are for Iraqis or Iranis or much of the Middle East. This is realism. This is not a criticism. This is just the way things are. They, especially after the genocide war in Gaza, okay, especially after Israel expanded that war from Gaza to include Lebanon, bombing Syria, occupying Syria right now, okay, expanding the war down in Yemen in response to Houthi rebel um, drone attacks in Israel, wanting a conflict with Iran really bad, desperate for such conflict. Um, the regime, one prays, one hopes, will be an improvement over where it is replaced. We can't be utopian about this. It's not going to be a Norwegian democracy. However, one hopes that it's an improvement. I am cautious that it will not be. I am cautious that I think it will be about the same, improved in some respects, worse in others. Let's just wait and see. Um, Now, I want to finish this by talking about the role of China in all of this, because China is the largest economic player in the Middle East, by the way. And it has the future of the Middle East in its hands economically because of the China led BRICS group, of which Saudi Arabia and Iran are members. Okay. The future economically, that is geoeconomically, especially, of that region is not with the West. Turkey is the puzzle because Turkey is flirting with the China led BRICS group, and it's flirting with the European Union, and it's flirting with Moscow, and it's flirting with Washington. And so Turkey, in its ambition to become the hegemonic neo-Ottoman uh, imperial presence in the Eastern Mediterranean and realize its goal as the hegemonic power in this region of the world, um, is very important. Make no mistake about it. Turkey is very, very important. NATO member, flirting constantly with European membership, flirting with BRICS, um, flirting with Putin, flirting with President Xi Jinping in China. So there's a lot of that. China, realistically speaking, looking at the longer term horizon, will remain dominant economically in the Middle East. China will eventually integrate Syria economically because it has integrated much of the rest of the region, by the way. And for a very simple reason, China is the world's number one economic power. GDP terms, measured in purchasing power parity, according to the United Nations, according to the IMF, according to the World Bank. China, not the U.S., 7 to 8 trillion ahead of the U.S. in purchasing power parity. Moreover, China's economy is based on infrastructure development and the secondary sector of production, primary sector of production, not the service sector of production, the tertiary sector of production, not the parasitic financialization sector of stock market speculation, which is what all about, which is the West is, and especially the United States, Western Europe. China will eventually, no matter what regime, no matter what's happening. And by the way, relatively speaking, China has had a laissez-faire approach to Syria. It's operating from behind the scenes to Iran and Russia, but it hasn't had much of a voice in this. Again, like I said, the situation in Syria is far more complex and complicated. It requires an entire book to explain what happened during the Assad era and the various aspects. And it is an insult to reduce it to populist rhetoric about good and evil and moral superiority of one group or another. It's not that simple. It's much more complex. I thank you for listening, and I ask you to write questions, write comments, and to please join this channel. This channel is managed by Assad Alim, my very good friend, and it's educational. The purpose of this channel is to share with you knowledge about world affairs, philosophy, psychology, history, and so forth. Thank you very much for joining.